All right, cool. So we'll hop back into session 2 here. Everybody's favorite topic, correction. And for this one, I'm just gonna go through some principles of correction that are biblical, and then we have kind of something different and fun instead of breakouts for this session before session 3. But we're running a little behind, so I'm gonna see how fast I can talk. This will be fun for everyone. But yeah, we'll see. But anyhow, correction. Continuing with our theme and thought of planting and of trees. Depending on how you're using your plant, they need regular care, right? You have to trim them. You have to do things. If you're planting a tree and it grows, eventually you're gonna have to trim it so you can mow around it and you can mow underneath it without getting whacked in the face. You trim plants so they can create shade if that's their purpose. If it's a fruit tree, I assume it needs pruned based on various parables and things from the Bible. I've never actually planted a fruit tree, but they need trim so they can produce more. Some trees, even for their own good, they need to be trimmed and corrected. We have exactly 5 trees on our property, and they were all planted on the same day a few years ago, and 4 of them they're called autumn blaze maples. And I did a little bit of research because I hope to one day take care of them. And autumn blaze maples are cool because they're the fastest growing maple. No maples grow any faster than autumn blaze maples, but because they grow so fast, when they're bigger, this is going to be a while from now, but when they're bigger, you have to trim them every 3 years because they grow in a way that isn't structurally sound because they grow so quick. And so literally for its own good, because it's a combination of all these different breeds, you call species? Thank you. Yeah. It's kind of unnatural. And so because it grows in a way that for its own good, you need to chop off branches every 3 years. And so plants need corrected. Similarly, it's our responsibility as parents, as we're hoping to see our kids flourish and hoping to help them grow as we're the planters, to correct our kids. We can't just let things float out there, let our kids just float wherever they go. We need to correct our children. So how this is going to work, I'm going to go through I worded it bad methods of correction. Really what I meant was unbiblical methods of correction. Some of them are not actually bad. Some of them are useful. Some of them are bad. So we'll go through some unbiblical methods of correction. Then we'll talk about biblical methods of correction. So first, what are some bad or unbiblical methods of correction? Number 1 here, we have pop psychology. So this would be nothing against psychology, Krista. But this would be taking the latest fad, the latest thing you read about, the latest thing you saw on TV and saying, oh, actually, if we do this, if we have our kids crawl backwards 5 minutes every day, they'll grow up to be excellent readers, or, whatever study came out, and just kind of going with whatever pop psychology comes our way and trying to apply it to correct our children as they grow. Number 2 is behavior modification. So this would be giving rewards for good behavior, and this is kind of where I'm saying this isn't a bad method of correction. It's actually it is a good method of correction. It's just if it's solely used, or if we only use this method of correction, it's going to train our kids' hearts in a way that I think we don't want. So behavior modification, you do something good, I'm going to reward your good behavior. It's effective, it works, it helps kids pee in the potty and do all kinds of different things. And so we want to use it, but we have to be careful that this isn't our main method of correction. And I have this quote from Ted Tripp again, where he talks about where if this is our only way that we're correcting our kids, it trains the kid's heart in a certain way. He says the heart is trained to greedy self-interest and obtaining rewards. The point of appeal is to Junior's greed. Honestly, that's what you're appealing to. You're saying, well, I know you're greedy. I know you want ice cream. So I'm going to play on the fact that you're greedy, not discourage it, but almost encourage it to get you to do what I want. Because Junior lives a lust-driven life in which he'll perform for ice cream and other goodies, the program seems to work. It will work, but your methods inevitably instruct the heart, and the heart is what determines behavior. So obviously we're going to use behavior. I think it's obvious, at least for us, we will use some behavior modification, but that can't be our main method of correction. Number 3 is actually just a bad one. This would be emotionalism. So this is when we find ourselves, and this no shame, I have found myself saying things like this, but you find yourself saying things like, do you realize how that makes Daddy feel when you do that? Do you realize what that hurts Daddy, that makes Daddy sad? What you're doing is you're you're playing off their emotions, and you're putting them in the place where they're in charge of your emotions with their behavior. That's putting a burden on kids that they were never meant to carry. But it can be effective, and it's something parents do is they use emotionalism to correct their children. For punitive correction, so this would be you do something bad and then you get a punishment for it. Again, in and of itself, not a bad thing, but the key word there is punitive. So this would be, this isn't discipline with a direction or a goal in mind. This is like saying you've done something wrong, and so we need to right this wrong with punishment. And that is different. I think hopefully you can see the difference. It's different as we go along. It's different than disciplining towards a goal. It's just punishing because there's like these cosmic scales that you need to correct in the world, which isn't actually true because God doesn't actually. Jesus came so we don't have to pay for our sins, but he still disciplines us. So those are two different things. And it's why, I mean, not like it's wrong to say punishment when you're talking to your kids, but why, when I talk to our little kids, I always say, I'm disciplining you. Why? Because we read about it in Hebrews. Every father who loves their kid disciplines them, and God disciplines us. And a lot of times it hurts really bad, but he doesn't punish us. His son stood in our place and took the punishment we deserve. And so punitive correction, and then finally erratic eclecticism. I always have trouble saying words like that. This would be just randomly throwing everything together and hoping for the best. So just erratically taking all these methods and hoping for the best. And I think that's where a lot of parents find themselves. So we need to ask ourselves, what is our method of correction? No matter what age our kid is at or our future kids are at, what is our method of correction? And I think the Bible points us to a life of communication and discipline aimed at the heart. And that's a carefully written sentence that I stole from Shepherding Your Child's Heart. But every word in there is important. It's a lifelong thing of communication and discipline, but this is all aimed at the heart. And so I want to take the rest of the time during this session now to talk about communication and then to talk about discipline. So the Bible calls us to a life of communication. And so if we want to discipline our children, if we want to correct our children, it's not going to happen through one-time talks. It's not going to happen through lectures. It's going to happen through a life of communication. Again, going back to the when you lie down, when you rise up, when you walk along the way. And so we want to engage in a life of communication with our kids, and we want to focus on understanding. And this is the aimed at the heart part. Okay, so when we talk to our kids about their behavior as they again grow up and are able to talk, we want to focus on them understanding what's happening, not just correcting the behavior. But it takes really good communication to figure out the heart behind a kid's behavior. So we could just correct the behavior, but we're going to use communication to understand the behavior and get at the heart of the behavior. For example, let's say that one of our daughters hits the other daughter. It's never happened because our kids are perfect, but let's say that happens. Let's say that Eloise hits Adeline, which is more likely than the other way around. It's not just that she hit her sister. It's deeper than that, right? It's not just a behavior. It's deeper than that. She hit her sister because she was angry, right? And it's actually not even. It's deeper than that. It's not just that she was angry. It's that she was angry because she didn't get her way. Right? What causes, James talks about that. What causes anger? It's when we don't get our way. How we want to get our way. Well, it's not just that she didn't get her way, technically. It's that in her heart, and in all of our hearts, we have a desire to be God. We have a desire we want to get our own way. We want to have our desires met. And so she doesn't just need to learn, hey, don't hit your sister. She needs to learn that, hey, only God gets his way all the time. That we are creatures, we're made by him, and we shouldn't get our way all the time, but he should get his way all the time. And guess what? Your sister is also a creature made by God and made in his image. And so she doesn't get her way all the time either. But just because she's preventing you from getting your way doesn't mean you can hit. And so you kind of see the difference there. That behind all of our behaviors is a heart that goes so much deeper in order to sort of drill down into someone. This is anybody's heart. But a kid's heart that we're trying to correct, we have to communicate to get at the heart of behavior. It takes good communication, and it takes a good conversation where understanding is gained before correction is given. So again, when you're 18-month-old is toddling around and they're touching the, oven or something, I mean, you just need to stop it. You need to figure out a way to make that stop. But as they grow, you need to get at the heart, and to get at the heart, it takes communication. A couple of Proverbs. Proverbs 18:2 says, "A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion." So a foolish person, when they're talking, you're talking to them. They don't even want to understand what you're saying, want to understand what's going on in your life. They just want to tell you something. And that's so true, right? That's just a bad way to communicate with people. But how often do we not apply this to our kids, where we don't take the time to actually understand what's going on with them, understand what's going on in their heart before expressing what correction we need to take, because it might not be what we think. A story came to mind, but I'm just going to keep going because I want to go faster. So here we go. So it's so true, and we need to apply it to our children. Another proverb, Proverbs 18. Whoa, I skipped. Proverbs 18:3. "If one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame." It's just so foolish to just give an answer to somebody before you've really heard them out. Again, we think this is true with adults. How much more true is it when it comes to communicating with our kids? And so if we're going to have communication with our kids as they grow that aims at the heart, we need to have good communication with our kids. And to do that, we need to use all the biblical types of communication. And this next point, I think, is my favorite of all the stuff I'm covering. So this is worth the price of admission, which was free, but it was worth your 3-4 hours here. And that's to use all the types of communication. So often we find ourselves, as we communicate to our kids, mostly communicating rules, correction, and discipline, which is important. We have to communicate rules, correction, discipline. That's biblical, to communicate rules, correction, discipline. As we read the Bible, we find rules, we find correction, we find discipline. But that's not the only types of communication we find in Scripture. There's also encouragement, rebuke, entreaty, instruction, warning, teaching, and prayer. And so what we want to do is use all the types of communication. And so a part of your packet there, at the end of the packet, before the additional resources, there's a conversation guide or a follow-up guide, whether you're parenting with somebody or individually, that I want you to look at, take time to look at after this, schedule some time, look at that conversation guide. And one of the questions is going to be, in what area, what one of these types of communication do we want to grow in? Do you find yourself never encouraging your kid, or never teaching your kid, or never praying with your kid? Just rules, correction, discipline, rules, correction, discipline. These are the biblical tools we need to enter into a life of communication to get at the heart of our kids' behavior. So make sure you take time to look through that conversation guide, and actually schedule time. Maybe it's over lunch today or sometime. That's communication. Next is discipline. So again, it's a life of communication and discipline that's aimed at the heart. And so for discipline, we need to recognize that the Bible references the rod. That we have these passages in Proverbs in the Bible that talk about parents using the rod with their children. And these might make us uncomfortable, and we might feel weird about them, but they're in the Bible, so we have to read them. So Proverbs 22:15, it says, "Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him." So just naturally, we have foolishness bound up in our heart, and it's the rod that's going to drive it far from them. I had this professor in college. I'm not sure. I'm not recommending this. I just thought it was funny. But whenever he disciplined his kids, he would literally ask them, "What does the Bible say is in your heart?" "Foolishness." "So what does that have to do? Daddy have to do? Drive it out." And I was just like, "Whoa, that is something." So I don't know if you should do that or not, but it is true. It's true. We have foolishness, and the rod drives it far from him. Another passage: "Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die." It's a life-saving mission. "If you strike him with a rod, you will save his soul from Sheol," which is the place of the dead. And this is a quick side note. This is physically true. Like you hear stories of kids who don't have any concept of authority or any concept of discipline. Sometimes they literally die because of it. I remember a story years ago where it's terribly tragic and all that, and there's all kinds of issues with it. But there was a kid who he had a toy gun, but it didn't have like that little orange cap on it, I guess. It wasn't obvious that it was a toy gun. And so somehow he got in a confrontation with police, and he literally had a toy gun. He could not have done any harm. And the police were asking him, hey, put down your gun, put down your gun, put down your gun. But he didn't have apparently a category for authority, for discipline in his mind, and he didn't put it down, and he literally lost his life because of it. It literally could be life-saving. Hey, you're in the parking lot. Hey, don't go that way. Stay close to the car. They run out in front of the car. I mean, it literally could be physically life-saving, but I think also this is talking about more than that. It's talking about walking in God's way and not walking in foolishness. And so we have to talk about the rod. We can't just talk about communication. We have to talk about the rod. Now, I'm not bringing this up to say that you have to like spank your children. I think that's a decision that you need to make. I don't want to make it for you because I have 3 kids. That's plenty for me. I don't want to raise your kids as well. But even if you don't spank your kids, you still need to translate these principles to your own form of discipline. Okay, so you still can't ignore because like I don't apply this literally. I don't literally use a rod on my kids. So maybe you don't apply this literally, but you need to apply this. So I respect your decision and your authority as a parent, but at the same time, you need to understand these principles of the rod. And so if you spank your kids, apply this to spanking. If you don't spank your kids, figure out a way to translate these principles to your own form of discipline. So what is the rod biblically? A few things that the rod is biblically. One, the rod is a parental exercise. We don't see references to it saying like adults, use the rod on any child. It says parents. It's a parental exercise, not meant to be, at least biblically, it's shown not only by parents and no one else. 2, the rod is an act of faith. It's you just believing what God said, like, hey, I need to discipline my child because there's foolishness bound up in their heart because I want to save them. I want to save them from Sheol. It's an act of faithfulness. It's an act of being faithful to your child, of saying, hey, I will discipline my child, and I'm going to be faithful in that because I love them. It's a responsibility. It's a responsibility given to parents. Again, number one, it's a parental exercise, and so only you can do it. And so if you don't discipline your child, nobody else is going to do it for you. Nobody else should do it for you, really. And so it's your responsibility. Second to last, at least biblically, it's a physical punishment. I think it's this wisdom from the Bible that recognizes that, especially when kids are young, associating a physical punishment with a behavior early on, it helps them. It gives them a level of understanding that they're not going to get otherwise. And then obviously that's going to change as they get older. And again, if you decide differently, you just need to translate the principles to your own parenting. And this is my favorite one. It's a rescue mission. We should always view discipline as a rescue mission. When our kids are behaving in a way that needs corrected, we should think, I'm going to rescue them from foolishness. I'm going to rescue them from going this way. The Bible is very clear about the blessing that comes when kids honor their parents and when kids obey their parents. It is a blessed life. It is a realm of blessing that you're operating in when you obey your parents. If your kid is operating outside of that realm, what you want to do is rescue them and bring them back into that area of blessing. And so it's a rescue mission. And just to be honest, I know this is true in my life. If I don't keep these things in mind, I won't do it. Because it's the worst, right? It's awful. Like disciplining your kids is no fun. It's time consuming. It's hard to do it right, to really get at the heart of behaviors. It's painful for you. It's painful for them. It's terrible. But when we see what it is and what it accomplishes, I think it really inspires us to be faithful in it and to discipline our children. But just as important as what the rod is what it is not. And so no matter how you discipline your kids, it is not the right to be angry. We should never discipline our kids in anger. If we find ourselves feeling anger, we should wait until we're not angry to discipline our kids, because we never want to discipline out of anger. I think these things are, if you think of the difference between disciplining and like hitting, because you teach your kids not to hit, these are the difference. Your kid gets mad and hits someone. Your kid gets frustrated and hits someone. You teach them not to do that. And so you can't be doing that because now you're displaying behavior that you're telling them not to do. And so the rod is not a right to anger. It's not the right to hit our children whenever we wish. That's just not a right that we've been given. It's not an authority we've been given. The authority we have over our kids is subject to God's authority. They're His kids first, not just our kids. And so this isn't a right to hit our children whenever we wish. And it's not a right to vent or it's not a venting of frustration. I'm just frustrated with them. So my frustration has reached the point where I need to vent it somehow. Your kids were not made for that. No human was made for that. I mean, that's abuse. That's called abuse. This is not that. And it's not retribution. Again, that's going back to what I was saying earlier. This isn't like you're balancing some cosmic scales. You deserve this. For it to be right, this has to happen. No, it is a method of discipline. It's meant to point towards, it's not a thing in and of itself. It's meant to point towards a correction of a behavior or the training of your child's heart. So we need to keep that in mind. A couple good quotes surrounding that would be, we don't discipline for childishness, even when it's terribly inconvenient. So, and there's lots of examples of that, especially when kids are young, and I'm sure as they grow too, but there's just certain ways that kids act because they're just a kid, right? And you never, ever, ever discipline for that. You know, a kid spills their chips in their car. That's what kids do, right? They spill chips in there. I mean, if the kid looks at you and dumps it and then steps on it, that's different than being childish. That's being defiant, right? But we don't want to discipline for childishness. Another example would be like 2, 3, 4 age. There's developmental things happening in your kid's brain that causes them to have temper tantrums. It's just the way it is. And when they're in that state of having a tantrum, it's a developmental thing that's happening, and it's something that obviously needs to be corrected. They need to grow out of it. But the way their brains are working, you know, their decision making part of their brain is not actually even engaged. And so if you were to discipline them for that, it's not going to translate into getting rid of that behavior. In fact, you'll probably just teach them not to express their emotions, which is not a good thing. You know, we want kids that are able to express their emotions. And so we need to make sure we figure out what is childish and what is defiant and what is actually behavior that needs corrected. And if you're not sure, I think I tend to lean towards childishness, at least with the use of the rod, because you want to be sure you're using it faithfully. And if you're not a family who does spank or anything like that, and you're like curious to know more about it, you could check out Shepherding Your Child's Heart, which is a book back there. There's a whole chapter just on spanking, which walks through principles that are not biblical. They're not like you have to do it this way, but they're helpful because they show you how to do it in a way where you make sure you're not shaming the child, you're not angry at the child, you're not, hurting them in a way that's going to be detrimental to them, but that you're actually doing it with the right kind of heart. So I think it's important to think through and just create rules. I'm not going to do it in front of other people because I don't want to shame the child. I'm going to tell the child how many spanks they get because I don't want to get carried away. I'm never going to be angry. I'm never going to be frustrated. Things like that. So make sure you check that out. But what I love about the use of the rod is this, actually, over the other methods of discipline, is when the discipline is over, it's over. There's no carryover. The slate is clean. It's time to start fresh. And I love that about it. It's not, hey, you can't enjoy this tonight. And hey, 3 days later, it prevents you from holding it over your kid's head unnecessarily, when honestly, you need to move on. Well, you didn't listen to me 2 days ago, so now you can't do this. The discipline correctly applied, however you apply it, it should be doled out. And then when it's over, it's over. There's no bringing it back up. There's no holding it over their head. There's no psychological games or emotionalism going on. And there's some beauty in that your kid can just go, hey, I've been restored in this relationship with my parent. They've brought me back. They love me. They smile. They're happy to laugh with me. It's not like there's any further punishment because punishing your child in those ways is probably more detrimental. So that would be some principles surrounding communication and the rod. Just some more quick hits before we turn it over to our next thing. Would be we always want to map the correct way out as we're disciplining our kid. So hey, here's what you did. Here's what you could have done, right? You're mapping the correct way out. Hey, you were tempted to do this because you felt this way. Here's what you could have done. You could have moved yourself away from the situation. You could have done something else. Get at the heart behind the behavior. This is something Jesus did with his parables. he couldn't really get through to the religious leaders or get through to the Pharisees. So what did he do? He appealed to their conscience, and he got to the heart of their behavior with these stories where they'd be agreeing with it. They'd be like, oh yeah, that's crazy that servant got beat up. Oh, they sent another servant and they killed that servant? That's nuts. And then he's like, that's you. And he's like, oh, they're like hit with their own logic. And that's what we want to do with our kids, appeal to their conscience and get to the heart behind their behavior. And the thing with discipline is the more you do it consistently, the easier it gets. You might think, holy cow, I'm going to spend all day, every day, disciplining my kid. Because honestly, especially when kids are young, pre 5, 6 years old, they need to learn obedience. They need to learn to obey you. It's a big part of raising that small child that is harder to learn when they're older. You think, really, I'm going to discipline them every time they disobey me? And the answer is yes. But the more consistently you do it, the easier it will get. And then what will happen is you'll go through seasons of being more lenient and more strict, because you'll realize, we've been lenient and now they're running away with it. And really the easy path is the consistent path, even though it's harder on the front end. That's what I'm trying to get with there. One more quote. This is from Ted Tripp again, where he's talking about what standard to set for your children. And some of us, we think we shouldn't set biblical standards for our kids because we think, well, they're not a Christian yet, maybe, or their heart hasn't been changed by the Holy Spirit. They haven't received Jesus. They're not walking with Him. So how can I expect them to love others the way they should, or to treat others the way they should? And so we're tempted to sort of lower the bar, thinking that we'll bring them along. But actually, we want to keep the bar where it's at, because that's going to help them recognize their need for a Savior. That's going to help them recognize that, hey, mom and dad are setting the standard for me that I literally cannot keep, right? But getting back to my hitting analogy, like, honey, I don't want you just to not hit your sister. I want you to not be angry at your sister. And guess what? You can't do that without Jesus' help. You need Jesus' help. And so you're keeping the standard high, and by doing that, you're helping them see their need for the Savior that hopefully you're pointing them to all the time. And so he says they realize their children are unable to love others from the heart without salvation and new birth. So they conclude that since it's not possible, the standard must be lowered. So then they set a standard that's in keeping with their children's resources. But if we set a standard in keeping with our children's resources, they'll never rely on God's resources. And that's what we want to do. All right, so there's some biblical principles. One more little thought is to recognize the stage you're in, because it really matters what stage you're in. There's the discipline years, 0 to 5, and this is from the book called Parenting back there by Andy Stanley. Where you're learning to obey. Then there's the training years, 5 to 12, where you're learning the heart behind obedience. Then there's the coaching years, 12 to 18, where you're teaching the kid to train their own heart. And then you enter into the friendship, mentorship stage, which would be a totally different stage when it comes to communication and correction. All right. So with that sort of weighty topic, what we thought would be good would be helpful and good and maybe a little bit lighthearted, would be to have some parents who have been there, some parents who are done parenting. You're never really done parenting, but they're done with this stage of parenting, the correction stage of parenting. Share some one-liners, some quick hits that might be helpful. And so we have 4 videos from people who aren't here. Some of them you will recognize, and then we have some people in the room who are also going to share. And the idea is write down the tips, write down the tricks. Glean what you can, but the overarching idea of doing this next part of the session would be for us to recognize that, hey, there are parents who have been there. That we're a part of a church that's multi-generational, and so we have resources that go beyond just information. We have humans that we can go and talk to and say, hey, I'm struggling with this. What did you do? Back when you were in this stage. Hey, I'm dealing with this. Have you ever dealt with anything like that? And I think people who have gone before us, they offer us kind of a perspective on what's actually important. They're a little bit more relaxed because they're not just in it. And I think we can glean a lot of wisdom that we just kind of leave on the shelf because we don't interact that way intergenerationally. So I'll hit the videos. There's 4 videos, and then we'll line up Melinda, Jerry, Jim, and Lori.